Public Affairs very much thanks Residco, our sole corporate underwriter, for helping to make the production of this show possible.
And the single most important thing in a democracy is we should be free to discuss the mechanics of how we conduct elections in an open and transparent way without having anybody tarred and feathered and labeled with smears like racism and so forth, Jim Crow allegations, because one wants to talk about them. One wants to talk about the question, what works best for preserving the integrity of the ballot? What works best for ensuring that everybody who has the right to cast a vote gets to cast that vote and have it count, and nobody who doesn't have a right to cast your vote is casting that vote for you, or voting more than once.
So, as you know, there are people, often progressive, liberal, Democrat, we're hearing more these days, perhaps different days, different things, that no real evidence of fraud, they say, in 2020. And so, therefore, why are we mucking around trying to reduce fraud when there's no evidence or significant evidence or evidence of significant fraud? What do you say to those people? Welcome to Public Affairs. We're doing a show today on ballot integrity. Voter fraud, election fraud, all of those things, whether it's a national issue, whether it's a state issue, it all comes together. And we have the perfect guest because we have a gentleman and a scholar who's here today, who's a thoughtful, intelligent, knowledgeable guy, whether it's economics, whether it's law, whether it's elections, whether it's the U.S. Constitution, whether it's the practical nitty-gritty of Chicago politics. He's done it all. So with that as a backdrop, talk more about Joe Morris, our guest. But it's important that you know that he is the current chairman of the Heartland Institute, one of the world's leading free market think tanks. And he was the Assistant Attorney General for President Reagan. Let's start with something small. Was the 2020 election stolen, as President Trump claims, or is that allegation a lie, as his detractors claim?
Well, what I like
big lie they like to say.
What I like to say is that the election was stolen fair and square, by which I mean there were changing ground rules regarding the conduct of the election, justified in part by the emergency of the pandemic, for which one team, the Democrats, were far better positioned to capitalize on the changing ground rules. And they showed it by capturing more votes in more states where it counted. Was it a completely fair election? No, of course not. No election is completely fair. No election is perfect. The goal is to give people fair elections, open, transparent elections, not perfect elections. And that is a changing target because the facts on the ground change from time to time. So it's absolutely essential that over time that the rules for conducting elections, all aspects of them, from what happens before the ballots are cast to when the ballots are counted and everything in between, need to be adapted, reformed to keep elections fair and honest. Where we are right now, Jeff, after the 2016 election, where there were absolutely phony allegations that a candidate, the eventually winner, Donald Trump, colluded with a foreign power, the Russian government, to steal that election. That was the theme of the Democrats in 2016 and 2017. Completely false, a total lie, not true. In 2020, President Trump contended that the Democrats stole the election away from him, that Joe Biden, in fact, did not win a majority of the Electoral College. And he tossed out some absolutely nonsensical propositions of constitutional law, trying to get the vice president and the Congress to do something they cannot do, which is to overturn the counting of the ballots that occurred in the states. Untrue, a lie. Both sides have sinned. Both sides come into this game, as lawyers like to say, in peri delictu, with unclean hands. And the bottom line is, right now, American voters from coast to coast do not have confidence that they have a fair and honest election system. And the time has come for both Democrats and Republicans in Washington and state capitals to stop playing games and to start paying attention to serious ground rules, to cleaning up how elections are conducted, so that the American people and the people of Illinois and Chicago can have confidence that the outcomes are honest.
This document, the U.S. Constitution, which also has the Declaration of Independence, this book I hold.
Don't leave home without it.
Right. So, Joe Morris, you are a constitutional lawyer. We didn't mention that you are a partner at Morris and De La Rosa, offices in Chicago and London. You know this document well. You studied at the University of Chicago Law School. You studied at the University of Chicago as an undergrad. Does this document control the election laws of the United States, and are they in large part by this document delegated or devolved or articulated in the states? Do the states in large part in the United States have control of our election laws, or is it a shared control with the federal government?
As in most things in a federal system, it's a shared control. We obviously have federal elections for president, vice president, and members of the Congress, representatives and senators. Most of our elections, of course, are for state and local offices, which are all controlled by state law. Qualifications are by state law, and the methods of conducting elections are specified by state law. The two systems have to blend. And if there's no other reason why the two systems have to blend, it is that elections are very expensive to conduct. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get people on the ballot and to sort out challenges to ballots. It takes a lot of work and a lot of money to put polling places, as we have here in Cook County, in some 3,000, 4,000 different places around the county, where every election day 5, 6, 10 people on the government payroll need to be stationed with equipment and machinery and so forth to receive ballots and get them counted honestly and cleanly, transparently, where representatives of the parties and the public and the candidates can see what they do. If you're having early voting, that adds to the cost and the expense and so forth. So it's perfectly logical that if you can combine elections and hold state and local elections on the same day when you conduct federal elections, it makes a lot of sense and it saves a lot of time and money. The best way to do that is to have a minimal number of federal ground rules that are uniform across the country, relating to the rules for electing the president and members of Congress, and generally confide the rest of the mechanics to the people on the ground at the state and local level who've been doing it for 250 years, running elections, and for the most part running them honestly, and through whose experiences we've learned where the defects and the weaknesses in the system are. And that's exactly what the Constitution provides for. It provides for a blending of the federal and the state responsibilities, with the heavy lifting done by state and local governments and state and local taxpayers.
So going back to 2020, was the major change there the large surge or large increase in number of mail-in votes across the country? And was that dictated by COVID, or was it something the Democratic Party nationally thought it had an advantage and pushed, or something else?
Well, it was both plus something else. The something else is timing. At the same time, we've had the pandemic, and we've been experimenting with different technologies of voting, including voting by mail. We've been expanding the voting period. A great question that Americans need to decide, whether we decide it nationally or we decide it state by state, is, do we want to have an election day, or do we want to have an election season? That is the theory, as it has been for a couple of hundred years, that we all listen to the debates and the arguments and watch the candidates and learn what we can, and then on a designated day, all of us who care go to our respective polling places, cast our votes, and the votes are counted that day, and we get the decisions who's been elected to what particular office. Or do we want to make it easier for people, perhaps the people who aren't as committed or as concerned or as knowledgeable about voting, to think about it and start voting at some point and end voting at another point, which may be a week or a couple of weeks or a whole month or more. And little by little, particularly as legislators have wanted to convey the message that they're all in favor of making it easier for people to vote and have more people vote, a cheap and easy way they think to do that is by expanding the early voting period. And they've begun to do it mindlessly. Professional politicians of both parties love mail-in ballots, because mail-in ballots give opportunities for professional politicians to look over the shoulder of voters. The thing that most voters want is secrecy in the ballot, And the thing that most professional politicians, the party pals, the hacks, Republican, Democrat, most of them, they want to know how people are casting those ballots. And so mail-in votes create all kinds of opportunities for other people to look over your shoulder. Show me your ballot in a friendly, non-threatening, sometimes threatening way. Whether it's a union, a club, the NRA, the precinct captain, family members. I'll take your ballot for you. I'll, open the envelope. If the ballot isn't cast the way I want your ballot cast, I throw the ballot away. It's never counted. Who knows? All kinds of opportunities.
Is that what we call ballot or vote harvesting?
Ballot harvesting is the process by which, systematically or otherwise, third parties collect ballots from the voters entitled to cast them and are the intermediaries in delivering them to the election authorities. The only way you know that your sacred ballot has been honestly cast without interruption, without being mishandled in any way, is if the voter himself or herself puts the vote in the slot or casts the ballot on the machine. Anytime there's any kind of intermediation, as we know in Chicago and Cook County and have known for 100 years, anytime there's any intermediation between the individual voter and the counting of that vote, there are opportunities for mischief. And depending on the locale and the year, who is proposing the mischief is inevitably the party in power, the party that has the best handle on that particular technology of mischief. It goes back and forth between both parties. No party is always innocent. No party is always guilty. But the only people who benefit from confusion and constantly shifting ground rules about how elections are conducted are not the voters. It's the professional politicians. They're the people who benefit from confusion.
So you are known, as an aside, as Mr. Conservative, have been known as Mr. Conservative for decades. So when somebody's putting together a panel on TTW, of which you happen to be for the last 8 years head of their community advisory board, if TTW, WGN, Channel 5, Channel 2, putting together a panel, they're looking for a Democrat, which they can easily find because most of the media tend to be Democrats. They're trying to find a conservative. They don't know those as well. They come to you. But my point is, you still think you can look at this dispassionately, as you're doing just now. You can talk about political parties, Republican and Democrat, who try to gain, and where they can gain, from various aspects of the law, right? You
Correct.
think you can do that, right?
Of course.
Okay. So, I mean...
Precisely because I'm a conservative, because the lenses through which I look are fundamentally formed by the Declaration and the Constitution. That's where my highest loyalties are. My loyalties are to the Constitution of the United States, not necessarily to a political party. I consider myself a faithful and active Republican because I believe overall in the context of my time that the Republican Party provides me a better channel with which to influence the course of public discussion and public decision-making in the direction of vindicating the Constitution. But I hope there's no doubt in anybody's mind, my goal is clear. I want to vindicate, in the words of the President's constitutional oath, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Right. So things that are lodestars to you, goals, one person, one vote, secrecy of the ballot, reliability of the ballot. Do we have an election season, as you've alluded to, or do we have an election day? Do those decisions, do those issues that I've just referred to matter in terms of the accuracy and honesty and reliability and confidence of the voters in the honesty or accuracy of the elections?
Yes to all of the above. And the single most important thing in a democracy is we should be free to discuss the mechanics of how we conduct elections in an open and transparent way without having anybody tarred and feathered and labeled with smears like racism and so forth, Jim Crow allegations, because one wants to talk about them. One wants to talk about the question, what works best for preserving the integrity of the ballot? What works best for ensuring that everybody who has the right to cast a vote gets to cast that vote and have it count, and nobody who doesn't have a right to cast your vote is casting that vote for you or voting more than once. So when we want to have free and open conversations about does it make sense to contract or expand early voting, does it make sense to ensure that there is some way of connecting a particular ballot by way of its envelope or something with the person who had the right to cast that ballot, to make sure that that person's ballot is counted and is counted once, and somebody who doesn't have the right to cast two ballots doesn't cast two ballots. It's wrong and it inhibits freedom. It inhibits the health of democracy to say that some such aspects of discussion are out of bounds because they indicate you are a racist. That's false, that's phony, and it is injurious to democracy.
Some of the laws, as the laws that are being revised in Georgia and Florida and possibly in Texas, are they doing something to get at diminishing fraud from mail-in voting? If you could generalize across several states.
Well, that's quite a waterfront to discuss.
Of course.
Yes, I think mail-in voting will continue to expand in the next election cycle or two, if only because professional politicians like it. Democrats think that they have a corner on the market about how best to put mail-in voting to partisan advantage. But Republican professional politicians are not far behind. And the more Democrats push that envelope, I think, the more they will learn to rue it. Because as has happened in every kind of change in election technology or technique in the 20th and 21st centuries, if one party pioneers it, the other party catches up and figures out how to use it too. And that's true in the mechanics of elections. That's been true in fundraising for elections. It swings back. Who's raising more money this year, Democrats or Republicans? It swings back and forth as each new twist and turn of PAC law and other restrictions are imposed. There's one law that cannot be repealed, and that's the law of unintended consequences. And the more legislators, whether at the federal or the state and local level, fiddle with the laws, the more unintended consequences are introduced into the system. Look, there are some basic things. You've used the word lodestar. I think that's a great word. There are some key concepts that need to animate us. One is that everybody who wants to cast a vote should be able to do that and do it once and have it counted. The one person, one vote rule has been an important principle of American constitutional law with that label for the last 60 or 70 years. It remains as valid today as it was in the 1960s. Each person gets one vote and that vote should be counted. If you're casting your ballot all on one day with individuals walking to the precinct closest to their house and casting their votes in person, you got a pretty good idea that you have a one person, one vote system. When you're casting votes over the period of a month, and there's a possibility that somebody is registered to vote at home and the same person is registered to vote where there's a vacation home and the same person is registered to vote where she's got a college dormitory, and so forth, games get played, and more than one vote is cast by more than one voter in more than one place. So the question is how to limit and control that. Some states, Democratic-controlled states, such as New Jersey, for example, Virginia and California, places where Democrats can control pretty much all of the government, the executive branches, the legislature, the voting systems, and so forth. In those states, they have chosen to use numbers to connect a ballot with a voter, Social Security numbers and driver's licenses. So to get a ballot in those Democratic states, New Jersey, Virginia, or California, you have to apply using your driver's license or using a Social Security number, the last four digits of the Social Security number. For some reason, when the states of Florida and Georgia decide that they want to use those same techniques that have been pioneered by the Democrats in New Jersey, Virginia, and California to tie ballots and ballot applications to individual voters, somehow, in the words of Joe Biden, that makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. It's a question of whose ox is being gored. The game is the Democrats like to play the game their way in their states. They don't want Republicans to figure out how to play the game to secure ballots or exploit the weaknesses of the system in their states. So as I say, it's a battle. It's a phony battle between professional politicians where they're not looking out for the interests of the voters. In Illinois, we do it in a completely different way. In Illinois, we don't use voter ID in the form of Social Security numbers or driver's licenses or the like. What we use in Illinois is we use voter ID. It's voter ID of a signature. So when you cast your ballot, if you cast your ballot in the precinct house, in the precinct polling place in Chicago, on election day, you walk into the precinct house. Your neighbors are there conducting the election, presumably within a few blocks from where you live. Maybe they know you, but if they don't know you, you identify yourself. They pull your registration card. These days it's computerized, so it comes up on its screen, and there's your signature. on the screen, and you sign in an application for ballot, and some election judge compares your ballot, your signature on your application with the signature on your registration card. Now, maybe you're an 80-year-old person, and your signature today is a lot different than it was when you registered to vote when you were 21 or 18. Maybe not. Maybe it's clearly the same signature. So we have that subjective process of matching signatures that we use in Illinois, and we do the same thing if you vote by mail. When you vote by mail, you get a ballot that you have to return in an especially provided envelope that the Board of Elections or the county clerk has sent to you with your ballot. And on the outside of that ballot, you sign your name. Your ballot goes in that envelope, and your ballot goes into the election authority with your name identifying it. And it's only when your name has been verified, when the name on the signature as you put it on the outside of your envelope is matched against the signature on your registration card, that envelope is opened and your ballot is separated from the envelope that identified it, and then your ballot gets counted as an anonymous ballot. So everybody, every state in the union uses some form of voter identification, and the argument that to use, as Georgia and Florida seem to want to do, Social Security numbers or driver's licenses is in some way racist or outlandish is a falsehood, because those are precisely the mechanisms that some of the most democratic states in the union use without that problem. Keep building the confidence of the American people that elections are going to be as efficient and as clean and as honest and as fair as possible is to prevent Congress from mucking it up. The federal system has worked pretty well these last couple hundred years. Right now there's a bill pending in Congress, H.R. 1, that would federalize the entire election system. It would put the federal government in charge of elections. Everything from drawing maps, district maps for congressional elections, to turning the Federal Election Commission, which is currently a bipartisan, evenly matched body, into a partisan-controlled body, where control of it would bounce back and forth from party to party depending on who's in control in any given year, making vastly more decisions than the federal government currently makes over all the minutia of how elections are controlled, using the theory under the Constitution that Congress gets to make the rules for presidential and congressional elections, and hoping that spills over into the control of state and local elections too, but also centralizing judicial review of elections. One of the hidden time bombs in H.R. 1 is that all appeals across the country of the conduct of elections will no longer be going to local courts or even the United States Courts of Appeals in the regional circuits. They all have to go to the District of Columbia. Now, there is absolutely no reason on earth why the courts in the District of Columbia are more expert in the conduct of elections than courts here in Chicago, including our Seventh Circuit. The rules are statutory, and the rules are provided by the Constitution. Those are the things that should guide the conduct of elections. The only reason to centralize all election adjudication in the District of Columbia is, for the moment, Democrats who control Congress think that that's a sandbox in which Democrats are likely to control the judiciary for the foreseeable future.
But across the country, you're saying you can do either. You can use the signatures that they're using in Illinois as long as you have a reliable system to check them. You can use driver's licenses as they're starting to do, I guess, now in Georgia and in Florida and other states.
And as they have done in Democratic states for a long time. The point is every electoral system requires that the voter be identified some way or another. And there are many ways to do it. What I'm saying is, in any given time and place, it's a reasonable conversation to say what is the best way we can identify our voters, and don't rule anything out of bounds simply by smearing the entire discussion, the entire conversation as inherently racist.
Is it appropriate to have a particular concern about vote harvesting, as you point out, collection and turn-in votes, because of this maybe analogy to, you point out in Chicago, they often like a system where the precinct captain will be looking over the voter's shoulder. So this gives people who are vote harvesting perhaps access to looking over the shoulder. And so there are regulations, I guess, in the new law in Florida, I think, does a lot to close down on that, close down on vote harvesting. And before you could do it, you just couldn't get paid. There were limitations. But now I think you cannot. You can do your own. You can do your immediate family. You can do maybe two more. Is that a big enough possible fraud issue to channel a lot of resources to trying to control that?
Of course it is,
Okay.
because what's at stake there is the secrecy of the ballot, And an overarching principle of everything we do in the conduct of free elections in this country or around the world. I mean, the secret ballot was pioneered in Australia, which is why it's still called in many places the Australian ballot, including in this country. The secrecy of the ballot is a paramount factor in ensuring that the elections are free, fair, and not controlled by politicians. Anything politicians can do to get between the voter casting the ballot and the counting of the ballot, wherever the ballot's going to be counted, any steps of intermediation between that are points of weakness. The more of those points you can eliminate, the closer you can get to having the voter mark the ballot secretly and the voter putting the ballot right in the ballot box or in the punch system, the better off you are. Every step that intermediates between that is a step that raises the possibility of depriving the voter of secrecy, allowing all kinds of other mischief, and in the end of the day, doing the thing that is most poisonous to a democracy, which is undermining the faith of the people, the confidence of the people that their elections are honest and the real thing.
So, as you know, there are people, often progressive, liberal, Democrat, we're hearing more these days, perhaps different days, different things, that no real evidence of fraud, they say, in 2020. And so, therefore, why are we mucking around trying to reduce fraud when there's no evidence or significant evidence or evidence of significant fraud? What do you say to those people?
I say that's Pollyanna-ish. Of course there was evidence of fraud. There was evidence of fraud in every voting jurisdiction in America. The question is, in any given year, is there enough fraud to have made a difference in changing the outcome? And you hope not. But there were cases in Texas, for example, of the justice of the peace who's been indicted, a Republican, by the way, who's been indicted in Texas for harvesting and having his will with scores of ballots. He went and picked up ballots and did what he threw out the ones he didn't like, changed the ones he wanted to change or could change, cast votes where people left their ballots blank. And so he got caught. Yes, there was vote fraud in 2020. Was there enough to have changed the outcome in any swing state that might have changed the outcome in the presidency? I don't think so. Reasonable people can differ, and it's worth having a serious after review of that question. But when you're looking coast to coast at situations where often in a particular locale an election is decided by 2 votes a precinct, the whole election for a school board seat or a city council seat or a state legislative seat is decided by 17 votes. That happens every election. Well, if you can do mischief to 20 ballots in a village election or a state senate election, you can change the outcome of that election. So every election, as we have experience with how people cheat or try to cheat, or we see the exposure of the possibilities for cheating, a prudent, rational legislature, they're the people who make the rules, who are faithful to their responsibility to ensure that the people are delivered a free and fair election, ought to be looking at problems to cut them off before they occur. Need to be cut off. We need to have clearer rules. They can also vary a little bit from state to state, but attention needs to be paid what happens after the so-called end of election day. I think it would be a lot wiser, however, whether we're having an election day or an election period, it would be a lot wiser for the election authorities to concentrate on having a very clear cutoff time to know when the ballots have to be in. And then we know when we start looking to the election authorities to announce the results of that election. Instead of having the results coming in dribs and drabs, well, here's what we know today as against what we're going to know next week and as against what we're going to know the week after that. That process really undermines the confidence of the American people in the honesty of the election, and that needs conscientiously to be addressed by legislatures from coast to coast.
Thank you so much, Joe Morris, an expert on so many things, as people who've been watching this show have seen. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing your wisdom, and we hope you will come back soon, and we hope you folks watching this show will come back and watch Public Affairs.